The morning sun hung low over the dusty airfield at Fort Bragg, casting long amber streaks across the concrete where a line of AH-64 Apaches stood parked in disciplined formation. Their dark silhouettes looked almost alive against the horizon, long rotor blades stretched wide like resting wings of steel predators. Crew chiefs moved between them with toolkits in hand, finishing pre-flight checks before the afternoon training cycle. The scent of jet fuel lingered in the air, mixing with the hum of generators and distant radio chatter from the control tower. Near the edge of the maintenance hangar fence stood an old man who didn't quite belong in the picture. He wore a faded olive jacket, neatly pressed despite its age, and a cap bearing a small embroidered aviation insignia that most younger soldiers wouldn't immediately recognize. A few modest ribbons were pinned carefully above his left pocket. They weren't flashy, but they carried weight. His boots were scuffed yet polished, and though his hair was silver and his face lined with time, his posture was firm, almost military in its precision. He wasn't staring at the base buildings or the moving trucks. His eyes were locked onto one particular Apache, tail number partially visible beneath a thin coat of dust. There was something in his gaze, recognition, maybe even affection. He took a slow breath, as if remembering a sound that hadn't yet been made. A pair of young mechanics noticed him first. One nudged the other and nodded toward the fence. Probably someone's grandfather visiting, he muttered. They returned to their checklist, but curiosity lingered. Captain Daniel Reynolds stepped out of the operations building at that moment, aviator sunglasses shielding his eyes from the glare. In his early 30s, confident and sharp in his pressed uniform, he carried himself with the easy authority of someone used to being obeyed. Two lieutenants followed behind him, engaged in light conversation about the day's flight schedule. Reynolds spotted the old man almost immediately. "Who's that?" one of the lieutenants asked quietly. Reynolds adjusted his sunglasses and walked toward the fence, boots striking the pavement with steady rhythm. The lieutenants followed, faint smirks already forming as they sized up the visitor. When Reynolds reached the fence, he offered a polite but firm tone. "Morning, sir. This area's restricted." The old man turned slowly, and up close, his eyes were sharper than expected, clear, alert, observant. "Good morning, Captain," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "I apologize. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Just admiring the aircraft." Reynolds crossed his arms casually. "You familiar with Apaches?" The old man looked back at the helicopter, a faint smile touching his lips. "Very familiar." One of the lieutenants chuckled softly. "She's not exactly a museum piece." The old man didn't react to the remark. "No," he agreed. "She's better than that." Reynolds tilted his head. "You serve?" "Yes, sir. Flew gunships before this model came online. Later worked in systems evaluation when the Apache was first introduced." He said it without boasting, simply stating a fact. The lieutenants exchanged doubtful looks. Reynolds removed his sunglasses now, studying the veteran more carefully. The confidence in his tone didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded lived in. "Oh, you tested Apaches?" Reynolds asked, a trace of amusement slipping through. "Among other things." The captain glanced back at the aircraft and then at his officers. The moment felt harmless, light. A few crew members nearby slowed their movements, sensing entertainment. Reynolds gestured toward the nearest helicopter. "Tell you what, sir. If you know her so well, why don't you start her up?" A ripple of quiet laughter passed between the lieutenants. It was a joke, nothing more. Everyone knew the Apache required authorization codes, procedural precision, and current certification. There was no way this elderly visitor would get far. The old man turned fully toward Reynolds. His expression did not change. "Are you giving me permission, Captain?" he asked evenly. Something in his tone made the air shift slightly. It wasn't defiance. It was professionalism. Reynolds hesitated for half a second, then shrugged. "With supervision," he replied confidently. "Can't hurt." What Reynolds didn't notice was the presence of Colonel Whitaker several yards away, conducting an inspection of the maintenance bay. The colonel had paused when he overheard the exchange, choosing not to interrupt. He watched quietly now, arms folded behind his back. The old man approached the Apache without hurry. As he stepped closer, one of the crew chiefs instinctively moved aside. There was nothing clumsy in his walk. He placed a hand gently against the fuselage, fingers brushing the metal as though greeting an old friend after years apart. He climbed the access ladder with steady balance, surprising the nearest mechanic. Once inside the cockpit, he settled into the seat with natural familiarity. The joking smiles on the ground began to fade. Inside, his hands moved with purpose. Battery switch, power lever, APU control, each motion flowed into the next without hesitation. Under his breath, he called out the checklist softly, word for word, exactly as written in the technical manual. The auxiliary power unit began to whine. One lieutenant straightened. "Sir, he's not guessing." Reynolds took a step closer to the aircraft, uncertainty creeping into his expression. The rising pitch of the APU cut through the morning noise. Heads turned across the flight line. In the cockpit, the old man's face was focused, transformed. The years seemed to fall away as muscle memory took control. Gauges lit up one by one, panels glowing in the dim interior. Fuel flow engaged. Ignition sequence initiated. The first deep mechanical rumble rolled outward, low and powerful. Across the airfield, conversation stopped. Colonel Whitaker stepped forward slightly, eyes narrowing as he recognized not just the sound, but the flawless precision behind it. What had begun as a captain's harmless joke was no longer amusing. The Apache was waking up, and every soldier within earshot now understood that the old man in the cockpit was far more than he appeared. The low rumble deepened into a powerful mechanical growl as the first engine spooled up with smooth precision. The sound wasn't chaotic or forced, it was controlled, deliberate, like a predator stretching awake. Dust began to swirl beneath the aircraft as the turbine gained strength. Soldiers across the flight line turned fully now, their tasks forgotten. What had started as background noise had become the center of attention. Inside the cockpit, the old veteran's hands moved confidently across the illuminated panels. His fingers didn't tremble, they didn't pause in uncertainty. Every switch was flipped in sequence, every gauge scanned with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds, maybe thousands, of times before. He didn't rush, he didn't perform for the crowd forming below. He simply followed procedure. Captain Reynolds stood directly beneath the nose of the Apache, staring upward. The smirk that had once been on his face was gone. In its place was disbelief, and something else creeping in behind it. Doubt. One of the lieutenants stepped closer to him. "Sir, he's running full startup protocol." "That's not possible," Reynolds muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Above them, the second engine began to spool. The pitch rose, harmonizing with the first until the sound vibrated through the concrete itself. The main rotor blades twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly at first. A crew chief instinctively reached for his headset, eyes wide. Colonel Whitaker had moved closer now, stopping just outside the forming circle of soldiers. He watched the cockpit carefully, jaw tight but expression unreadable. He knew the startup sequence intimately. He knew the order, the timing, the rhythm of it. And the man inside that helicopter was executing it flawlessly. The rotors began to turn slowly, heavy blades slicing through the morning air. The movement kicked up stronger gusts of wind, sending loose papers skittering across the tarmac. A nearby maintenance cart rolled slightly before a mechanic grabbed it. The energy on the flight line shifted from amusement to tension. Reynolds felt it fully now. This was no longer a harmless joke. Regulations were strict, authorization was required, yet there were no warning alarms, no system faults flashing on the panels. The Apache responded to the old man as if it recognized him. Inside the cockpit, the veteran's eyes scanned the instrument cluster. Oil pressure stable, engine temperatures within limits, rotor RPM rising smoothly. He adjusted a control slightly, listening, not just to the sound, but to the feel of the aircraft. The vibrations traveled through the seat, through his boots, through his bones. For a brief moment, the years between then and now dissolved. He was back in a flight suit, headset on, lifting into open sky. Down below, one of the younger soldiers leaned toward another. "Who is that guy?" "No idea," came the whispered reply. "But he knows exactly what he's doing." The rotor speed increased, blades now spinning fast enough to blur at the edges. The downdraft intensified, flattening uniforms against bodies and whipping dust into spirals. Reynolds shielded his eyes, heart pounding, not from fear of the aircraft, but from the realization that he might have badly misjudged the man inside it. Colonel Whitaker finally stepped forward, raising a hand slightly as if measuring the situation. His gaze remained fixed on the cockpit. He recognized the posture, the discipline. This wasn't recklessness, it was mastery. The Apache reached full idle rotor speed, steady and powerful. It stood alive now, a machine built for war humming with restrained force. And yet it remained perfectly controlled. Inside, the veteran rested his hand lightly on the collective, not lifting, just feeling the responsiveness. He wasn't going to take off. That much was clear in his restraint. This wasn't about spectacle, it was about proving something without saying a word. Reynolds swallowed hard. He stepped closer to Colonel Whitaker. "Sir, I can shut it down." The colonel raised a quiet hand to stop him. "No," he said calmly over the roar. "Let him finish." Those words carried weight. Around them, soldiers exchanged stunned looks. If the colonel wasn't panicking, neither would they. After a few steady seconds, the veteran began the shutdown sequence. His movements were just as precise as the startup. Throttle adjustments came smoothly. Engine power reduced gradually. Rotor RPM began to fall in controlled decline rather than abrupt stop. The blades slowed from a blur to visible arcs cutting through dust-filled air. As the turbine whine softened and the rumble faded, an almost surreal silence settled over the flight line. The only remaining sound was the ticking of cooling metal. The rotors slowed further until they came to a dignified stop. The old man removed his hands from the controls and sat still for a moment, eyes forward, breathing evenly. Then he powered down the final switches, completing the checklist exactly as prescribed. Below, no one laughed now. Captain Reynolds felt the weight of dozens of eyes, not on the veteran, but on him. The cockpit canopy opened with a soft mechanical hiss. The old man climbed down carefully, boots touching the tarmac once more. Dust settled around him. He faced Reynolds and offered a small, respectful nod. "She's running well, Captain. Your crew maintains her properly." The simplicity of the statement hit harder than any reprimand. Before Reynolds could respond, Colonel Whitaker stepped forward, stopping just a few feet from the veteran. For a long moment, the colonel studied his face closely. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Colonel Whitaker came to full attention and rendered a sharp, formal salute. The entire flight line froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The sight of Colonel Whitaker standing at full attention, hand raised in a crisp salute toward the old man, stunned every soldier on the flight line into silence. The wind had died down now that the rotors were still, but the air felt heavier than before. Captain Reynolds' pulse thudded in his ears as he looked from the colonel to the veteran, trying to understand what he was witnessing. The old man's expression shifted, not to pride, not to triumph, but to something softer. Recognition. He slowly straightened even more, and though he no longer wore a uniform, he returned the salute with sharp precision. His hand didn't shake. It snapped up and down with the discipline of decades ingrained into muscle memory. "At ease," Colonel Whitaker said firmly, lowering his hand. His voice carried authority, but there was unmistakable respect in it. The gathered soldiers relaxed slightly, though no one dared to speak. The colonel stepped closer to the veteran, studying him carefully. "I thought I recognized that checklist cadence," he said. "It's been a long time, sir." A flicker of surprise crossed Captain Reynolds' face. "Sir." The old man gave a faint smile. "It has, Colonel." Whitaker turned slightly, addressing the stunned officers and enlisted personnel around them. "For those of you who don't know, you're standing in front of Brigadier General Thomas Avery, retired. One of the original evaluation pilots during the early integration of the Apache program into active service." A murmur rippled through the formation. Some of the older NCOs stiffened immediately, recognition dawning. The younger soldiers looked from face to face, trying to process the revelation. Reynolds felt heat creep up his neck. A general, not just a pilot, not just a veteran, a man who had helped shape the very aircraft sitting before them. Whitaker continued, his tone measured but clear. "General Avery logged more hours in prototype and early production Apaches than most of us combined. Several of the emergency handling procedures we train on today were refined because of his flight data and recommendations." Every word seemed to land directly on Reynolds' shoulders. The general, because that was who he truly was, shifted slightly, almost uncomfortable with the attention. "It was a team effort," he said quietly. Whitaker gave a small nod but didn't soften the truth. "Sir, with respect, your work saved lives." Silence returned, thicker this time. Captain Reynolds stepped forward finally, removing his cap. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by humility that felt both foreign and necessary. "General, I owe you an apology." His voice was steady but lower than before. "My comment earlier was out of line. I didn't know." General Avery looked at him calmly. There was no anger in his gaze, no lingering offense. "That's the point, Captain," he said gently. "You didn't know." The words weren't harsh. They were instructive. He glanced back at the Apache, its metal frame glinting under the sun. Aircraft like that don't care about rank once you're in the seat. They respond to discipline, respect, and preparation. Same as the soldiers who maintain and fly them. Several crew chiefs shifted subtly, pride rising in their chests. Avery continued, his voice carrying across the group without effort. "Confidence is important. It keeps you decisive, but humility keeps you learning. The moment you assume you've mastered something completely is the moment it humbles you." Reynolds swallowed and nodded. "Yes, sir." Whitaker watched the exchange carefully, then addressed the formation. "Let this be a reminder. Every uniform, past or present, carries a story. You don't measure a soldier by age or appearance. You measure them by service, sacrifice, and character." The soldiers responded instinctively. "Yes, sir." General Avery adjusted his jacket slightly, looking once more at the helicopter. His eyes softened again, not with authority this time, but nostalgia. "She's evolved," he said quietly. "Better avionics, stronger systems. But she still sounds the same when she wakes up." One of the young mechanics couldn't help himself. "Sir, what was it like flying her for the first time?" Avery paused, considering the question. A faint smile appeared. "Like holding thunder in your hands," he replied. "And knowing you had to be worthy of it." No one laughed. No one smirked. They simply listened. After a few more quiet exchanges, Whitaker personally escorted Avery away from the aircraft line. Not out of protocol alone, but respect. As they walked, several soldiers straightened instinctively, offering subtle nods as he passed. Captain Reynolds remained standing near the Apache long after the general had moved toward the command building. The earlier joke replayed in his mind, now sounding immature in hindsight. He looked up at the cockpit where Avery had sat and felt a shift in perspective he wouldn't soon forget. The blades were still now, but the lesson lingered. Sometimes the loudest sound isn't the roar of an engine or the spin of rotors. Sometimes it's the quiet realization that experience cannot be faked, and respect must never be assumed. And if this story reminded you that true strength comes with humility, and that every hero doesn't wear their rank on their sleeve, then make sure you subscribe to the channel, Her Stories Words, for more powerful and unforgettable stories like this.